Chapter 4 Alder Gulch. Alicia had no time for mining. The selfishness and greed of the gold seekers revolted him. He took a job as a stable boy at Plummer's livery stable. He heard all sorts of rumors about his boss, but Alicia never made quick decisions for or against anyone. He admired Plummer for his strength, his marksmanship, and his ability to influence other men. After all, he had now become the law in Bannock. He held the sheriff's office. One evening, while Elisha worked about the livery stable, he heard some men discussing a heavy shipment of gold which had just come in by stage from the mines. The man named Buck Stinson said, "I don't think we'll have any trouble. The driver is just a young kid and should be easy to scare." Elisha suspected that before morning the robber band would try to steal the gold, kept his ears open and heard other scraps of talking, and understood that the stage driver had hidden the gold in the manure pile behind the barn. The next morning, Alicia found the manure pitched all over the backyard. He knew then that the young driver had outwitted Buck Stinson and his fellow thieves. As the day went by, Alicia began to see that Henry Plummer did not intend to enforce the law or protect the rights of Bannock citizens. On the contrary, he shielded criminals and desperados. Alicia decided to give up his job with Plummer and began looking around for something else to do. Elliot had become a close friend of John Bozeman. Alicia admired Bozeman and felt relieved that Elliot had attached himself to a good, substantial person. In some ways, the two had common interests. Both had left young families and come west to make a home in which they could bring their wives and children. Elliot had come from Minnesota, while Bozeman had left his family in Georgia. One a Union sympathizer and the other a strong Confederate. They did not let their political differences mar their friendship. Bozeman bought a lot in Bannock, and now he hired Elliot to help him get out logs for a cabin. But as the days passed and the town became more violent and lawless while Plummer and his gang held control, Bozeman said one day, "I'm not going to finish this cabin. I won't bring my wife and children to Bannock." A few days later, he sold his lot and the logs for the cabin and set out with an old trail scout, John Jacobs, to find a new and shorter route for immigrants coming west to the goldfields of Montana. Licious saw the money from his wheat harvest dribbling away and knew he must find something profitable to do before it vanished. During his work at Plummer's livery stable, he had observed that merchandise freighted into the gold camps brought fabulous prices. Produce commanded any price the freighter could get for it. Saw one man sell 90 pounds of beans for $25. He talked to Elliot. "Think I'll begin freighting. It looks like a gold mine to me." Elliot took his pipe from his mouth and looked Lisha over with his stern, dark eyes. "Freighting is a mighty tough job, Lish. Not too tough for me." Lish had grown a little taller, but he knew now that he would never be tall like Elliot. "I'm sure I'll like freighting better than mining or being a stable boy. You know, there's always the danger of Indians and road agents." Elliot put his pipe back in his mouth and talked about it. "You're not yet 18. I know you're wiring quick and you've got a way with animals, but," he hesitated, "I just don't like the idea." Lisha said nothing. He had secretly hoped that his brother would throw in with him. He knew that Elliot, out of work since Bozeman left, had begun to hang around the saloons again, and he'd seen other things he didn't like. If he could get Elliot out on the road, away from the saloons and bad company, he'd do better. He thought of Melissa and the little boys back in Minnesota, and wondered when Elliot would ever be settled so he could bring them west. He wondered if Elliot ever wrote to Melissa, but he didn't ask. Well, Elliot said, if your mind is made up, I know better than to try to change it. Alicia sat, looking at his brother. He wished Elliot had gone with John Bozeman to scout out that new trail. The trip would be dangerous enough, but not so dangerous as the saloons and the bad influences in Bannock. He wished that he could do something, but he decided that nothing was likely to turn Elliot from his wild ways. Even before Alicia joined the caravan of freighters bound south for Salt Lake, Elliot got into serious trouble. He had been drinking and began to argue with Buck Stinson over some trifle. Buck, one of the most dangerous of the outlaws, threatened him. A man came running out of the saloon and over to the spot where Alicia worked at getting his wagon ready for the Salt Lake trip. Hurry, Lish! Elliot's in trouble. Alicia dropped his work, grabbed his gun, and ran to the saloon. At the door, he looked in and saw the other customers standing around Stinson and Elliot while the two sparred with one another, each trying to get the drop on the other. For the moment, Elliot seemed to have the advantage. Stinson yelled, "Watch it, Rouse! Next time I'll get you for sure." Elliot calmly trained his gun on Buck Stinson. One of Stinson's pals touched the outlaw's sleeve, and Stinson turned to look straight down the barrels of Lish's shotgun. He paled, dropped the argument, and left the saloon muttering curses. The two brothers walked back to the cabin. "You can't stay here in Bannock any longer," Lisha told Elliot. "It's not only Buck Stinson that'll be gunning for you. Plummer and his whole gang of outlaws will have you marked." Elliot dropped into a chair. He seemed a little dazed, and his speech came thick and harsh. "Guess you're right, Lish." But it didn't seem to occur to Elliot that he might join Lisha on the trip to Salt Lake. Another friend of the Rouse brothers, William Beale, lived in Bannock, and he too had no job. Elliot talked his situation over with Beale, and they decided to turn to produce raising. Turnips sold for 20 cents a pound, and potatoes $1 a pound. They knew that any garden produce they might raise would sell at a good price in the mining camps. A few settlers had located in the Gallatin Valley to the northeast, although they must travel quite a distance to reach the gold camps. They did not think of that as a handicap. They had found good, fertile land there, and they talked about their fine prospects. Elliot, however, knew of other good farmland at Three Forks, the headwaters of the Missouri River. Beale, an architect and carpenter by trade, liked the idea of leaving Bannock to try gardening. "Tell you how we'll work it," he said to Elliot. "Lish will take oxen in the wagon and go to Salt Lake for seed. As soon as the weather permits, you and I will head to Three Forks and get some ground ready for planting." "We'll have a fence, too," Elliot reminded him. "Otherwise, the wild critters will eat everything." With a lighter heart, Lisha joined the other bullwhackers in the caravan to Salt Lake. He intended to get seed potatoes and seeds of other vegetables he hoped that would do well in Montana climate. Then he would fill his wagon with other merchandise that he could freight to Bannock and sell at a profit. The day Lisha left Bannock, coffee sold for $1 a pound and tea for $3 a pound. So in Salt Lake, he picked up a good supply of both commodities. A dealer offered him a bargain in dried apples, and he decided to take a chance on them. Lisha finished purchasing and loaded before the other freighters, eager to get back in time to sow the crops at the right time. He, with a few other wagons, started back along the trail to the gold camps. He hazed his 6 head of oxen as fast as he dared. The heavy wagon could hold 4 tons of freight. The round trip from Bannock to Salt Lake and back took a month, and Lisha knew that he must dispose of his merchandise in the gold camps and then go on to Three Forks. He reached Bannock without incident and sold his freight at an excellent profit, then hastened on to Three Forks, where he hoped Elliot and Beale would have land fenced, plowed, and ready for planting. He found them hard at work. They had chosen land that could be irrigated from a stream so their crops would not suffer for lack of water. While the Rouse brothers and their partner worked at their planting, exciting news trickled into Three Forks. A large exploring expedition had left Bannock in 2 parties under the guidance of James Stewart and a half-breed scout, Lewis Simmons. The 2 parties had planned to meet at the mouth of the Ruby River, but through a misunderstanding, they failed to make contact. The smaller group, led by Simons, were captured by Indians and taken to their camp, then arraigned before their chief in a medicine lodge. One of the men, Bill Fairweather, had a particular ability to handle poisonous snakes. On the way to the Indian camp, he had picked up 2 rattlesnakes and slipped them into his shirt. Now, while the Indians deliberated on what to do with their captives, Fairweather pulled out his 2 rattlesnakes. He did tricks with them and played with the writhing serpents in the most sinister manner. Fairweather did more. He pulled up the sacred medicine bush that grew beside the lodge and struck the chief with it, at the same time flourishing his snakes with menacing gestures. All the Indians in the medicine house seemed overcome with awesome terror. They decided that this white man's magic must be more powerful than their own. They returned the horses and other equipment which they had taken from the party and urged the white men to leave. Simmons, the half-breed scout, perhaps impressed by Fairweather's show of magic, elected to remain with the Indians. Reduced now to 6 men, the little party tried to find the way back to Bannock by a devious route in order to avoid any more attacks by Indians. On May 26, they camped for the night in Alder Gulch, named for the alders that grew in abundance along the creek. Fairweather and Henry Edgar stayed in camp to guard the horses, cook the food, and wash the dishes, while the other 4 men took a look along the canyon for signs of gold. The horses grazed downstream farther than Fairweather thought safe, and when he went to bring them back, always alert for signs of gold, he noticed the outcropping of rim rock that struck him as interesting. He took the horses back to camp and brought Edgar back to have a look. Both of them brought picks and shovels. They dug and washed 3 pans and found about 45 cents worth of gold. Free gold. By the time the other men returned, they had washed out $12.50 worth of gold. During the next 5 days, the 6 men in the party staked out claims and panned $160 worth. As though carried by the spring winds, news of the fresh gold strike spread, with tremendous results. Hundreds of men headed for the new placer, each trying to outrun the other to stake a good claim. Almost overnight, claims were staked out over a distance of 12 miles along the creek in Alder Gulch. Within a week, hundreds of tents, bush shelter, and rude cabins sprang up. Many men did not even take time to build shelters, but slept on the ground beside their diggings. Still more came, and at the end of 3 months, the population of Alder Gulch reached an estimated 10,000. Thus, Virginia City came into being. By the end of the year, $10 million in gold would have been taken from the mines in Alder Gulch. To the Rouse brothers, working from dawn to dark in their gardens and fields, the strike in Alder Gulch meant a nearer and perhaps even better market for the produce they were growing. Lisha watched Elliot for signs of gold fever, but he and William Beale both stuck by the land. Later that summer, John Bozeman came through Three Forks. He left Laramie on July 6, 1863, as one of two guides for an immigrant train of 41 wagons. When they were 14 days out on the trail to the gold camps, 150 Indians of the Cheyenne and Sioux nations met the train and urged them to turn back. "If you turn back now, no harm will come to you," the chiefs said. "If you continue on, there will be great destruction. No wagon train shall pass through our country." After much discussion, the wagon master decided to turn back. Bozeman, much disappointed, left the wagon train 3 days later with 10 men. They struck out for the Montana mines. They were not prepared for the long and dangerous journey. They ran out of both food and ammunition. But Bozeman's courage and ingenuity saved them. They snared wild game and ate wild berries. They moved with furtive stealth to escape detection by hostile Indians. They reached the Yellowstone River and followed it for some distance, then left it at the spot where the city of Livingston now stands, and continued along a well-worn Indian trail over a mountain pass which the Indians called Yellowstone Pass. They descended into the Gallatin Valley, which Bozeman described as rich and fertile beyond anything he had ever seen. From there, they pushed on to Three Forks. Bozeman explained that he would go from Three Forks down the Jefferson to Point of Rocks on west to Bannock. Lisha saw that he had mapped his route with care so that the others could follow it. Later, it became known as the Bozeman Trail. During the summer, the Rouse brothers made trips to the gold field to dispose of their garden produce. Rabbits ate their peas and lettuce. No fence could keep them out. But beets, turnips, and beans excelled anything they had ever seen before, and the crops of potatoes proved excellent. Elliot took the light wagon and transported the garden produce to Virginia City, Nevada City, and Bannock. He sold it at a great profit. For the first time since they come west, fortune smiled on the two brothers. Then they discovered that feuds in the gold camp were never forgotten. On one of Elliot's trips into Bannock, where Henry Plummer still held the sheriff's office, the outlaw invited him into the saloon to drink with him. One of Elliot's old friends warned him, "Plummer hasn't forgotten your fight with Buck Stinson. You said something that day that made him think you knew about his criminal record." You're a marked man, Elliot. He's out to kill you. In spite of the warning, Elliot went into the saloon with Plummer for a drink. But when the sheriff tried to draw on him, he found himself looking into the barrel of Elliot's gun. Keep your hands off that gun, Plummer, or you're as good as dead. Elliot spoke in a cool, commanding voice. Plummer withdrew his hand. Never mind, Rouse. I'll get you yet. You're a mighty gamecock as long as you've got the drop on me. Everyone in Bannock knew Plummer's reputation as a gunman. Everyone knew that he had already murdered 7 or 8 men by using the same trick he had tried to work on Elliot, inviting them to have a drink with him and then shooting them dead as they stood at the bar. When Elliot got back to Three Forks, he related his experience to Lisha and Buell. You fellas will have to peddle the vegetables in the gold camps from now on. It's too dangerous for me in Bannock. So Lisha and Buell hauled the produce from the last load in the fall. This time the wagon, weighted down with potatoes, seemed too much for one man to handle alone. So Elliot went along with Buell. He also intended on this last trip to collect several accounts from merchants with whom he had left produce on consignment. Lisha watched them out of sight and thought how much more wholesome their situation seemed to be now. He even hoped that Elliot would settle down, build a house, and send for his family. Elliot seldom mentioned Melissa and the children any more.